The small apartment on the third floor of an old building was nothing special to look at. The paint on the walls was peeling in some places. The furniture was old and worn out. The kitchen was tiny and the windows did not close properly in winter. But for a little boy named Kian, this place was his entire universe. And at the center of that universe was his grandmother, the woman he called Nana. Nana was 62 years old when Kian came to live with her. She had soft wrinkles around her eyes and hands that were always warm no matter what season it was. She communicated through sign language because she could not hear. She had been deaf since she was just 7 years old. A terrible fever had taken away her hearing when she was a child, and she never got it back. The doctors at that time could not do anything to help her. Kian was only 4 years old when his parents died in a car accident on a rainy night. He was too young to understand what death really meant. All he knew was that one day his mother and father were there, kissing him goodnight and making him breakfast. And the next day, they were gone forever. His grandmother took him in without a second thought. She was all he had left in this world, and he was all she had too. Growing up with a deaf grandmother was different from other kids, but Kian never saw it as a problem. He learned sign language before he could properly read or write. Their conversations happened through hands and eyes and facial expressions. Sometimes, when words were not enough, they would just sit together in comfortable silence, holding hands, understanding each other without saying anything at all. They had their own special way of communicating that nobody else could understand. Nana had a secret that she kept hidden in her heart for many long years. When she was a little girl, before she lost her hearing, she had dreamed of becoming a pianist. Her mother had saved money for months to pay for her piano lessons. Every Sunday, young Nana would sit at the piano in her small church and practice for hours. She loved the way the music made her feel inside. It was like flying without leaving the ground. It was like magic flowing through her fingers. But then the fever came and took everything away from her. She never heard music again after that terrible week. She never finished learning the piano. That dream died when she was 7 years old, and she buried it deep inside her heart where no one could see it. She never talked about it with anyone, not even her closest friends. In her bedroom, Nana kept an old photograph in a small wooden frame on her nightstand. The picture showed a little girl with bright eyes and a big smile sitting at a grand piano. That little girl was her, taken just 1 week before she lost her hearing forever. She would sometimes look at that photograph late at night when Kian was asleep. She would touch the glass gently and remember what music used to sound like. But those memories were fading now, like old paintings left out in the sun for too long. Each year, she remembered a little less. There was an upright piano in their small living room. It was very old, and some of the keys did not work properly anymore. Nana had bought it from a neighbor many years ago, for almost nothing. She would sometimes sit at that piano and press the keys slowly, even though she could not hear the sounds they made. She would close her eyes and place her hands flat on the wood, feeling the tiny vibrations travel through her fingertips and into her palms. It was the closest she could get to music now. It was her only connection to that lost world. Kian would watch her do this and feel something heavy in his small chest. He did not fully understand why his grandmother looked so sad when she touched those piano keys, but he knew it meant something very important to her. He knew it was connected to a part of her life that had been taken away long ago, before he was even born. When Kian turned 8 years old, something happened that would change his life forever. Nana had been saving money for many months, putting aside small amounts from her pension check every week. On his birthday morning, she took him by the hand and walked him to a small music school just 3 blocks from their apartment. She spoke to the teacher there using a notepad, writing down her words carefully in neat handwriting. She wanted Kian to learn how to play piano. Kian was confused at first. He had never shown any interest in music before. He liked playing outside with his friends and reading comic books. But when he saw the look in his grandmother's eyes that morning, he understood something important. This was not just about him learning an instrument. This was about something much bigger than that. This was about a dream that had been stolen from her many years ago when she was just a child. His first lesson was simple and basic. The teacher showed him where to place his small fingers on the white keys. She taught him the names of all the keys, one by one. She played a simple melody slowly and asked him to repeat it after her. Kian made many mistakes, and his fingers felt clumsy and awkward. But he did not give up or get frustrated. In the corner of the small room, his grandmother sat watching quietly in a wooden chair. Her eyes never left his small hands on the piano keys. And when the lesson finally ended, Kian saw something he had never seen before in all his life. His grandmother was crying silent tears of joy. That night, Kian lay awake in his bed thinking about everything that had happened that day. He thought about his grandmother, who had lost her hearing as a young child. He thought about the old photograph sitting on her nightstand. He thought about how she would sit at their piano every evening and feel the vibrations she could not hear. And in that quiet moment, lying in the darkness of his small bedroom, Kian made a promise to himself. It was a promise that seemed completely impossible. It was a promise that made no logical sense at all, but he made it anyway, with all the determination and love that an 8-year-old boy could possibly have in his heart. One day, somehow, he would make his grandmother hear him play the piano. He did not know how he would do it. He did not know if it was even possible. But he knew deep down that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make it happen, because his grandmother had given up everything for him. She had taken him in when he had no one else in the world. She had loved him when he needed love the most. And now it was finally his turn to give something meaningful back to her. The very next morning, Kian woke up before the sun came up. He went straight to the old piano, in the living room, without eating breakfast. He sat down on the wooden bench and placed his fingers on the keys just like his teacher had shown him. He played the simple melody he had learned, making mistakes, starting over, and trying again and again. His grandmother came out of her bedroom and found him sitting there practicing. She stood quietly in the doorway and watched him, her hand pressed gently against her heart. She could not hear any of the sounds he was making, but she could see the concentration on his young face. She could see the fierce determination burning in his eyes. She walked over slowly and sat beside him on the small bench. She placed her weathered hand on the piano, feeling the soft vibrations as he played each note. And even though she could not hear a single sound, she felt something deep inside her chest that she had not felt in many long years. She felt hope blooming again. Kian looked up at his grandmother and smiled warmly at her. Then he turned back to the piano and kept on playing. This was just the very beginning of his journey. He had a long and difficult road ahead of him. He had thousands upon thousands of hours of practice waiting for him, but he was completely ready for all of it. For his grandmother, he would do absolutely anything in this world. And this promise was worth keeping forever. The years passed by slowly, and Kian grew taller and stronger. But one thing about him never changed. Every single day, without fail, he would sit at that old piano and practice. When he was 9, he practiced for 1 hour each day. When he was 10, he pushed it to 2 hours. By the time he turned 12, he was practicing for 4 hours every single day, sometimes even more, on weekends and holidays. His morning routine became fixed like clockwork. He would wake up at 5 in the morning, before the sun came up, and practice for 2 hours before school started. Then, he would come home in the afternoon, finish his homework as fast as he could, and practice for another 2 hours before dinner. His fingers would sometimes hurt so much that he had to put them in cold water, but he never complained about the pain. He never asked for a break or a day off. The other kids at school did not understand him at all. They would ask him to come outside and play football or ride bikes around the neighborhood. But Kian always said no. He had to go home and practice. After a while, they stopped asking him altogether. They started calling him strange names behind his back. They said he was weird and boring. They said he had no life outside of that stupid piano. Kian heard all these things. but he pretended not to care. Sometimes at night, he would lie in bed and wonder if they were right. Maybe he was wasting his childhood. Maybe he should go outside and have fun like normal kids his age. But then he would think about his grandmother, sitting alone in the living room with her hand on the piano, feeling vibrations she could not hear, and all his doubts would disappear like morning fog under the warm sun. His piano teacher was a strict woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She did not give compliments easily. Most of her students would cry after their lessons because she was so hard on them. But with Kian, something was different. She saw a fire in his eyes that she had never seen in any other student before. This boy was not playing piano for fun or to impress his parents. He was playing for something much deeper, something she could not quite understand. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult lesson, she asked Kian why he worked so hard. Most children his age would rather be playing video games or watching television, but this boy practiced like his life depended on it. Kian thought about her question for a long moment. Then, he simply said that he had made a promise to someone very important. He did not explain further, and she did not ask again. But from that day on, she pushed him even harder because she knew he could handle it. By the time Kian was 13, he had already completed piano grades that most students took years to finish. His teacher entered him in small local competitions, and he won most of them without much difficulty. People started to notice this quiet boy with the serious eyes and the talented fingers. They called him gifted and special. They said he was born with natural talent that could not be taught. But Kian knew the truth. There was nothing natural about his ability. Every single skill he had was earned through blood and sweat and tears. He had practiced the same pieces hundreds of times until his fingers memorized every note. He had stayed up late, studying music theory, when other kids were sleeping peacefully. He had sacrificed birthday parties and school trips and friendships. There was no gift involved. There was only hard work and an unbreakable promise. Nana watched her grandson grow with a mixture of pride and worry in her heart. She was so proud of how dedicated he was to the piano. But she also worried that he was pushing himself too hard. He was just a child, after all. He deserved to have fun and make friends and enjoy his youth. One evening, she signed to him and asked if he was happy. Kian smiled at her and signed back that he had never been happier in his entire life, and he meant every word of it. During his practice sessions, Nana would always sit nearby. Sometimes she would read a book or knit a sweater, but most of the time, she would just watch him play with her hand resting on the side of the piano. She could feel the vibrations change as he played different pieces. Fast and energetic pieces made the piano shake with excitement. Slow and sad pieces created gentle waves that traveled through the wood like whispers. She learned to read his emotions through these vibrations. When he was frustrated, the vibrations became sharp and uneven. When he found joy in a piece, they became smooth and flowing like a calm river. When Kian turned 15, his teacher told him about a big regional competition. It was the most important competition for young pianists in the entire area. Winners often went on to study at famous music schools and become professional musicians. She believed Kian was ready for this challenge. She believed he could win if he prepared properly. Kian practiced harder than ever before for the next 3 months. He learned a difficult piece by a famous composer that most adults struggled to play. He practiced it over and over again until he could play it perfectly with his eyes closed. He was confident and ready. He believed this was his moment to show the world what he could do. The day of the competition arrived, and Kian walked onto the big stage with his heart beating fast. The concert hall was huge and filled with hundreds of people. The lights were bright and hot on his face. He sat down at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. For the first few minutes, everything went perfectly. His fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. But then something went wrong. His mind suddenly went blank in the middle of the piece. He forgot what came next. His fingers froze above the keys like they were made of stone. The silence in the hall was deafening. He could feel hundreds of eyes staring at him, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, he managed to continue, but the damage was done. He finished the piece with several more mistakes and walked off the stage with his head down. He did not win. He did not even place in the top 10. The judges said his technique was good, but his performance lacked emotional control. They said he crumbled under pressure. They said he was not ready for this level of competition. Their words cut through his heart like sharp knives. That night, Kian came home and went straight to his room. He did not eat dinner. He did not talk to his grandmother. He just lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. He had worked so hard for so long, and it all meant nothing. Maybe those kids at school were right. Maybe he was just wasting his time on an impossible dream. Maybe he should give up and try to be normal for once in his life. The next morning, he did not wake up early to practice. He stayed in bed until noon, something he had not done in 7 years. When he finally came out of his room, he told his grandmother that he was done with piano. He was quitting forever. He could not do it anymore. The dream was too big, and he was too small. Nana listened to his words through his signs with a calm expression on her face. She did not look angry or disappointed. She simply walked to her bedroom and came back with the old photograph of herself as a little girl at the piano. She placed it in his hands and made him look at it carefully. Then she began to sign slowly, making sure he understood every single word. She told him that music was never about winning competitions or impressing judges. Music was not about being perfect or never making mistakes. Music was about the soul trying to speak when words were not enough. It was about expressing feelings that could not be said out loud. She told him that his soul had been speaking beautifully for 7 years now. One bad day did not erase all of that beauty. She signed 3 more words to him. Keep speaking, Kian. Kian looked at the photograph in his hands. He looked at his grandmother's kind and patient face. He felt tears rolling down his cheeks. But for the first time in days, they were not tears of sadness or defeat. That same night, he went back to the piano. He practiced until his fingers ached and the sun came up again. He had 4,000 hours behind him now, 6,000 more to go, and he was not going to stop until he reached every single one of them. 4 more years passed by, and Kian was no longer the small boy who once struggled to reach all the piano keys. He was now 19 years old, tall and lean with strong hands that had been shaped by countless hours of practice. His fingers had become like extensions of the piano itself. When he played, it was hard to tell where his hands ended and the music began. By this point in his life, Kian had logged over 7,000 hours at the piano. 7,000 hours of scales and arpeggios. 7,000 hours of classical pieces and modern compositions. 7,000 hours of mistakes and corrections and breakthroughs. Most people could not even imagine spending that much time on any single thing. But for Kian, it was simply his life. It was who he had become. His dedication had paid off in ways he never expected. A famous music conservatory had offered him a full scholarship to study piano performance. This was one of the best music schools in the entire country. Students from all over the world dreamed of getting accepted there. And they had chosen him, a quiet boy from a small apartment, with peeling paint on the walls. When the acceptance letter arrived in the mail, Kian's hands were shaking so badly that he could barely open the envelope. When he finally read the words inside, he ran to his grandmother and showed her the letter. Nana read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Then she pulled him into the tightest hug of his life. They stayed like that for a long time, both of them crying tears of joy and disbelief. At the conservatory, Kian discovered a whole new world of music. He met other students who were just as passionate and dedicated as he was. He studied under professors who had performed in the greatest concert halls around the world. He learned about music, history, and theory, and composition. Every day felt like a gift that he did not deserve. But the thing that set Kian apart from his classmates was not his technique or his knowledge. It was something deeper that the professors could not quite explain. When Kian played, there was an emotional depth to his music that touched people's hearts. It was raw and honest and full of feeling. One of his professors said that listening to Kian play was like reading someone's private diary. Every note revealed something true about his soul. Kian started entering competitions again, and this time, the results were very different from his failure at 15. He won the regional championship without much difficulty. Then he placed second in a national competition against pianists much older than him. Music critics began writing about him in newspapers and magazines. They called him a rising star with unusual emotional maturity. They said his playing had a quality that could not be taught in any classroom. What none of these critics knew was the secret behind his music. They did not know about the deaf grandmother waiting for him back home. They did not know about the promise he had made as an 8-year-old boy. They did not know that every single note he played was dedicated to a woman who had never heard any of them. That was the source of his emotional depth. That was where the magic came from. His music was not just sound. It was 11 years of love compressed into vibrations. Despite his busy schedule at the conservatory, Kian went home to visit Nana every weekend without fail. He would take the long bus ride back to their small apartment and spend 2 days with her. They would cook meals together, watch old movies with subtitles, and sit at the piano while she felt the vibrations of his playing. These weekends were the happiest times of his life. But then everything changed on a cold Tuesday afternoon in November. Kian was in the middle of a practice session at school when his phone rang. It was a number he did not recognize. Normally, he would ignore unknown calls, but something made him answer this one. A woman's voice on the other end asked if he was related to a woman named Nana. His heart immediately dropped into his stomach. The voice belonged to a doctor at the hospital near his grandmother's apartment. She explained that Nana had collapsed at home, and a neighbor had called for help. They had run many tests and discovered something terrible. Nana had a serious illness that had been growing inside her for a long time without any symptoms. By the time they found it, it was already too late for most treatments. Kian does not remember much about the next few hours. He remembers dropping his phone. He remembers running out of the practice room without his bag or his jacket. He remembers sitting on a bus that seemed to move impossibly slowly. And he remembers walking into the hospital room and seeing his grandmother lying in that bed, looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her before. The doctors gave her 18 months to live. Maybe less if the illness spread faster than expected. Maybe a little more if she responded well to the treatments. But the outcome was certain. There was no cure. There was no miracle waiting around the corner. His grandmother, the woman who had raised him and loved him and believed in him, was going to die. Kian fell apart completely. The promise he had carried in his heart for 11 years suddenly felt like a cruel joke. He had spent more than 7,000 hours preparing for a moment that would never come. He had sacrificed his childhood and his friendships and his normal life for a dream that was now impossible. What was the point of any of it? For 3 weeks, Kian did not touch the piano even once. He took a leave from the conservatory and moved back into the small apartment with his grandmother. He spent every moment by her side, trying to memorize her face, her smell, the way her hands felt when she held his. He cooked her favorite foods and helped her take her medicine and held her when the pain became too much to bear alone. One evening, Nana noticed him staring at the old piano in the corner of the living room. It was covered in a thin layer of dust now, because no one had played it in weeks. She could see the emptiness in his eyes when he looked at it. She could feel the defeat radiating from his body like heat from a dying fire. She reached over and touched his arm to get his attention. Then, she began to sign with her thin and shaking fingers. She asked him why he had stopped playing. Kian signed back that he could not do it anymore. The dream was over. There was no point in continuing. Nana shook her head slowly with a sad smile on her lips. She signed that she had never asked him to make her hear. She had never asked him to perform miracles. All she had ever needed was to feel the vibrations of his music through the old wooden piano. That was enough for her. That had always been enough. Then she signed something that broke his heart and put it back together at the same time. She told him that when she was gone, his music would be the only part of him that remained in this world forever. If he stopped playing now, a part of him would die with her. She did not want that. She wanted him to live fully and completely, even after she was gone. She reached up and touched his face with her cold fingers. Then she signed 3 words that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Do not stop. Kian sat there in silence for a long time after she fell asleep that night. He looked at the dusty piano across the room. He looked at his grandmother's peaceful face on the pillow. And somewhere deep inside his broken heart, a small flame that had almost gone out began to flicker back to life. The next morning, he wiped the dust off the piano keys, and he started playing again. Not for the promise anymore, but for her, for every moment they still had left together. 2 months had passed since the terrible diagnosis, and Kian had settled into a new routine. He would wake up early and make breakfast for his grandmother. Then he would help her take her morning medicine and make sure she was comfortable. After that, he would sit at the piano and play for a few hours, while she rested her hand on the wood and felt the vibrations. It was a simple life, but it was filled with more love than most people experience in a lifetime. One afternoon, Kian took his grandmother to the hospital for her regular checkup. The waiting room was crowded with patients and their families. Kian found 2 empty seats in the corner and helped Nana sit down. Then he sat beside her and held her hand while they waited for her name to be called. That is when he heard something that would change everything. A doctor was standing near the reception desk, talking to an older man and his wife. The doctor was explaining something about a medical procedure called a cochlear implant. Kian was not paying attention at first. But then certain words caught his ear. The doctor said that cochlear implants could restore hearing to people who had been deaf for many years. He said that even patients who lost their hearing in childhood could sometimes hear again with this technology. Kian's heart started beating faster. He leaned forward in his seat, trying to hear more of the conversation. The doctor explained that the implant was a small electronic device that was placed inside the ear through surgery. It worked differently than normal hearing. Instead of making sounds louder, it directly stimulated the hearing nerve and sent signals to the brain. Many patients who received the implant were able to hear speech and music for the first time in their lives. The older man in the conversation asked if his wife was a good candidate for the procedure. The doctor said they would need to run some tests, but he was hopeful. He said that cochlear implant technology had improved dramatically in recent years. Even patients who had been deaf for decades were now experiencing successful results. Kian could barely breathe. His mind was racing with thoughts and possibilities. Could this work for his grandmother? Could there actually be a way for her to hear after all these years? He had given up on the promise weeks ago. He had accepted that it was impossible. But now, sitting in this crowded hospital waiting room, hope was suddenly alive again. That night, after Nana fell asleep, Kian sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop computer. He searched for everything he could find about cochlear implants. He read medical articles and patient testimonials and research studies. He watched videos of deaf people hearing for the first time after receiving their implants. He saw elderly patients crying as they heard their grandchildren's voices. He saw a woman in her 60s listening to music after 50 years of silence. The more he read, the more his hope grew stronger. But he also discovered some difficult truths. Cochlear implant surgery was expensive, very expensive. The device itself cost a lot of money. And then there were hospital fees and surgeon fees and rehabilitation costs. Insurance sometimes covered part of it, but not always. And for older patients like his grandmother, many insurance companies refused to pay anything at all. Kian also learned that age was a significant factor in the success of the implant. Younger patients typically had better outcomes because their brains could adapt more easily to the new way of hearing. For someone like Nana, who had been deaf for nearly 70 years, there were no guarantees. Her brain might struggle to process sounds after so many decades of silence. Music might sound strange or distorted to her. There was a real chance that even if the surgery was successful, she might never be able to enjoy music the way hearing people did. But there was also a chance that it could work. And for Kian, that small chance was enough. The next morning, he called the hospital and asked to speak with a doctor who specialized in cochlear implants. He explained his grandmother's situation and asked if she might be a candidate for the procedure. The doctor agreed to see them for a consultation the following week. The consultation brought mixed news. After examining Nana and reviewing her medical history, the doctor said she could be a candidate for the implant. Her hearing nerve was still intact, which was essential for the device to work. However, he warned them that her age and the length of her deafness made the outcome uncertain. He also mentioned that her current illness added some risk to any surgical procedure. Then came the part that hit Kian like a punch to the stomach. The total cost for the surgery and rehabilitation would be around $50,000. Nana's insurance would not cover any of it because they considered her too old and her case too risky. If they wanted to proceed, they would need to pay for everything themselves. $50,000. Kian did not have that kind of money. His grandmother certainly did not have it either. Her small pension barely covered their monthly expenses. The scholarship paid for his education, but it did not include a salary. He had been so focused on his studies and his music that he had never thought about saving money for the future. For several days, Kian felt completely hopeless. The answer to his 11-year promise was right there in front of him, but it was locked behind a wall of money he could not climb. He considered asking his professors and classmates for help. He thought about starting an online fundraiser, but deep down, he knew that none of these options would raise $50,000 in time. Then he remembered something his piano teacher had told him months ago. There was a national piano competition coming up in 3 months. It was one of the most prestigious competitions in the country, attracting the best young pianists from everywhere. The winner would receive a cash prize of $50,000. $50,000. Exactly what he needed. Kian made his decision that very night. He would enter the competition, and he would win. There was no other option. Failure was not something he could afford. His grandmother's remaining time was limited, and every passing day brought her closer to the end. If he was going to give her the gift of hearing, he had to do it soon. For the next 3 months, Kian practiced like he had never practiced before. He increased his hours from 4 to 8 every single day. He barely slept. He barely ate. He played until his fingers cramped and his back ached and his eyes could barely stay open. His professors worried about him. They said he was pushing himself too hard. They warned him that he would burn out before the competition even started. But Kian did not listen to their warnings. He could not afford to slow down. Every hour he rested was an hour wasted. Every break he took was time stolen from his grandmother. He thought about her constantly while he practiced. He imagined her face when she heard music for the first time. He pictured her tears of joy and wonder. That image kept him going when his body begged him to stop. The day of the competition finally arrived. Kian traveled to the big city where the event was being held. The concert hall was enormous and beautiful, with golden chandeliers and red velvet seats. Backstage, he saw his competitors warming up. They were all incredibly talented. Many of them had been training at elite schools since they were small children. Some of them had already won international awards. Kian found a quiet corner and closed his eyes. He thought about his grandmother back home, watching the live stream of the competition on her small television. She could not hear anything, but she wanted to see him perform. She wanted to watch his hands move across the keys one more time. He thought about the promise he made when he was 8 years old. He thought about 10,000 hours of practice leading to this single moment. Then they called his name, and he walked onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding. The audience was silent. The grand piano sat waiting for him, like an old friend. Kian sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. He played for his grandmother. He played for the promise. He played like his entire life depended on it. Because it did. Kian played like he had never played before in his entire life. His fingers danced across the black and white keys with a passion that seemed almost supernatural. He had chosen to perform a piece called Clair de Lune, which means moonlight in French. It was the same piece his grandmother had been learning when she lost her hearing nearly 70 years ago. He had discovered this months earlier when he found old sheet music hidden inside the piano bench at home. The music filled the enormous concert hall like water filling an empty vessel. Every note was perfect. But it was more than just technical perfection. There was something raw and deeply human in the way he played. The audience sat completely still, hypnotized by the sound coming from the stage. Some of them had tears rolling down their faces, without even knowing why. They could feel the years of love and sacrifice and hope woven into every single note. When the final chord faded into silence, nobody moved for what felt like an eternity. Then, the applause began. It started slowly at first, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Then, it grew louder and louder until the entire hall was filled with the thunder of clapping hands. People rose from their seats, one by one, until everyone was standing. Kian sat at the piano with his head bowed, tears streaming down his cheeks, unable to move. The judges took a long time to make their decision. There were 11 other competitors, and many of them had delivered stunning performances. Kian waited backstage with his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He could not sit still. He paced back and forth in the small room, checking his phone every few seconds for messages from home. Finally, the announcement came. The judges had reached their verdict. All the competitors were called back onto the stage to hear the results. Kian stood in line with the others, his hands trembling at his sides. The presenter walked to the microphone and began speaking about the high level of talent displayed that evening. He thanked the sponsors and the audience and the families who had supported these young musicians. Then, he announced the winner. When Kian heard his own name, he did not react at first. His brain could not process what had just happened. The competitor standing next to him had to nudge his arm and tell him to go forward. Kian walked to the center of the stage in a daze. Someone handed him a large check and a golden trophy. Cameras flashed from every direction. The audience was applauding again, but he could barely hear them. All he could think about was his grandmother watching at home on her small television screen. All he could think about was the surgery that was now possible. All he could think about was the promise he had made 12 years ago, finally coming within reach. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks before Nana's 75th birthday. The doctors had reviewed all her tests and determined that she was healthy enough for the procedure. They warned Kian again that there were no guarantees. Her brain might not adapt to the cochlear implant after so many decades without sound. But they agreed to try. The night before the surgery, Kian sat with his grandmother in her hospital room. The walls were white and bare, and the machines beeped softly in the background. Nana looked so small in that big hospital bed. Her hair had turned completely gray now, and her skin was thin like paper. But her eyes were still bright and full of life. She signed to him that she was not afraid. She said that whatever happened tomorrow, she was already the luckiest woman in the world. She had watched her grandson grow from a scared little boy into a remarkable young man. She had felt his music through her fingertips for 12 beautiful years. Even if she never heard a single sound, her life had been complete. Kian held her hand and signed back that he loved her more than anything in the world. Then, they sat together in comfortable silence, the same way they had done so many times throughout his childhood. Some things did not need words or signs. Some things could only be understood through the heart. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Kian waited in the hospital lobby the entire time, unable to eat or drink or think about anything else. Every time a doctor walked by, his heart would stop for a moment. When the surgeon finally came out and told him the procedure was successful, Kian collapsed into a chair and cried like a baby. But the hardest part was still ahead. The implant needed time to heal before it could be activated. For 3 long weeks, Nana waited with a device inside her head that she could not yet use. The anticipation was almost unbearable for both of them. Every day felt like a month. Finally, activation day arrived. It was a cold morning in December, just 2 days before Nana's 75th birthday. Kian brought a small portable keyboard to the hospital. The audiologist explained that she would slowly turn on the implant and adjust the settings. She warned them that the first sounds might be overwhelming or confusing. Many patients found the initial experience frightening rather than joyful. Nana sat in a chair in the middle of the room. Kian stood beside her, holding her hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The audiologist connected her computer to the implant and began the activation process. At first, nothing happened. Nana's face remained still and expressionless. Then, very slowly, her eyes began to widen. Her mouth opened slightly. Her free hand flew up to cover her ear. Tears started streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. She was hearing. For the first time in 68 years, sound was entering her brain. She heard the beeping of the hospital machines. She heard the hum of the air conditioner. She heard the rustle of fabric as the audiologist shifted in her chair. These ordinary sounds that most people ignored every day were hitting her like waves crashing against the shore. She turned to look at Kian with an expression he would never forget as long as he lived. It was wonder and fear and joy, all mixed together. Her lips were trembling. Her whole body was shaking. She looked like someone who had just woken up from a very long dream. The audiologist gave them a few minutes to adjust. Then she looked at Kian and nodded. It was time. Kian sat down at the small keyboard he had brought. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely place them on the keys. He looked at his grandmother, and through his own tears, he saw her nod slowly. She was ready. After 12 years of waiting, she was finally ready. He began to play Clair de Lune. The notes floated through the small hospital room like gentle snowflakes falling from the sky. Nana's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes squeezed shut. Her body shook with sobs that she could not control. For 68 years, she had only felt music as vibrations through wood and bone. Now, she was hearing it. Actually, hearing it. The same piece she had been learning as a little girl before everything was taken away from her. And it was her grandson playing it. Her Kian, the boy she had raised alone in that tiny apartment with peeling paint. The boy who had practiced for 10,000 hours just to keep a promise nobody asked him to make. When the last note faded into silence, Nana opened her eyes. She looked at her grandson, sitting at that keyboard, crying just as hard as she was. She raised her trembling hands and signed 3 words. I heard you. Kian rushed to her side and wrapped his arms around her fragile body. They held each other and cried together in that small hospital room. 12 years of practice. 10,000 hours of dedication. One impossible promise, finally kept. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall on the city below. Somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. And for the first time in her life, Nana could hear them too. This was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter filled with sound.